declare the meeting open. I wish to advise that council meetings are recorded and made publicly available on our website, and in accordance with council's policy, I'll ask the General Manager to confirm that the recording has started.
Confirmed.
Our attendees this evening are myself, Councillor Reid, Deputy Mayor Councillor Gladright, Councillor Antoli, Councillor Bain, Councillor Cordova, Councillor Dean, Councillor Fox, Councillor Midgley, Councillor Richardson and Councillor Street. From our staff this evening, we have the General Manager, Mr Arnold, Director of People and Finance, Mr Spinks, Director of Engineering Services, Mr Reeve, Director of Environment, Development and Community Services, Ms Shakuti, Manager of Environmental Services, Ms Quinn, Manager of Development Services, Ms Tyler Moore, a Planner, Ms KC, a Biodiversity Officer, Mr Alexander, Media and Communications Advisor, Ms Adams, and our Acting Executive Assistant, Ms Lewis. We have no apologies for this evening's meeting. So it takes us to the first page of the agenda and confirmation of minutes. I'm looking for a mover and a seconder that the minutes of the council meeting held on the 15th of January can be confirmed as a true record. Got a mover in the Deputy Mayor and a seconder in Councillor Fox. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried. Workshops held since the last council meeting. We had a workshop last Monday evening, the 29th of January, in relation to the Kingborough Environmental Fund. Takes us to declarations of interest. Does any councillor have a declaration to make? No, thank you. Transfer of agenda items. Is there any item on the agenda that a councillor would like to transfer from open into closed or closed into open session? No, thank you. Questions without notice in the public. We don't have any members of the community here with us this evening. And also we don't have any questions on notice from the public. At the time the agenda was compiled, there were no questions on notice. But if people who are watching along at home would like to submit a question, you can do so by completing the relevant form on our website or by emailing us at kc@kingborough.tas.gov.au. Questions without notice from councillors. Does any councillor have a question? Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is around a population or settlement strategy. So, Circular Head Council has released a draft Circular Head settlement strategy for public comment. According to their council, quote, the settlement strategy will focus on how the community can grow while retaining the things they love and will identify the best places for further housing, business, commercial and light industrial development. It will also consider land constraints or hazards such as flood, inundation, important environmental values, as well as protecting agricultural land. My question is, does Kingborough have in place such a plan, or a plan to get a plan, or a plan to revise an existing population or settlement strategy to help identify and manage strategic, environmental, social and infrastructure risks to council's operations and service levels aligned with population growth projections?
Thank you. I believe Ms Tyler Moore can assist us with that.
Through you, Mayor, Kingborough is part of the Greater Hobart project, which is looking at a lot of that population analysis where the growth areas would be. So we're looking at it at a regional aspect. We do look at it and contribute a lot to various plans such as REM plan, which is part of that, and other strategic work that the state government is doing. We don't have one specifically for Kingborough, although we do have the land use strategy which does identify particular areas for further growth and so forth, plus the development of the local planning provisions. The LPS picks up a lot of that data and that information, and we have that analysis that guides us about where we're suggesting we need to do the rezoning and the like. It doesn't directly necessarily answer things like industrial land areas, but we do have projects underway for looking at structure plans for our regional areas such as Kingston, Kingborough, Snug, and also for our industrial areas to make sure that we are meeting what we need to for the future and looking at further growth in the area. So there's a few different working pieces. I haven't seen the plan that's been referred to see whether it encompasses the same, but we are certainly looking at a regional level with the state government.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, just one more follow-up question on that. Where does Margate fit into those plans? Specifically, I'm thinking of a Margate master plan or some kind of overarching project piece around making Margate more livable, but also in line with the population growth that they've experienced.
Ms Taylor Moore.
Through you, Mayor, there is an intent to have a strategic plan for Margate as well as Kingston. We just haven't been able to progress it as fast as we would like to due to resourcing and the planning scheme work that we need to do. And it would certainly include encouragement of particular uses and development and growth in the right areas. With the changes proposed under the LPS, there will be more opportunity for housing because now it is a serviced area. Historically it wasn't. That made a big difference. And it would encourage growth of services and activity in those areas to meet the needs of the residents. But of course the state government has a large role to do with that as well because they own significant parts of the infrastructure such as the water, sewerage and the roads, as well as the schools that are in the area. So they have a part to play in that as well, which certainly we would look to work with them for the strategic plan.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor. That Councillor Cordova just sparked a thought for me around the Margate Main Street Channel Highway. I know we had EOIs last year, just wondering how that process is going and when councillors will be updated around any movements in the area.
Funny you should ask that because Mr Reeve and I actually attended a meeting in Margate today with a resident and we were asked exactly that. I understand that the public consultation is going to start in about a month, but Mr Reeve, do you want to give some further details?
Through you, Mayor, yeah, that's correct. So the first piece will be to do some consultation. We've been doing a fair bit of work with Department of State Growth because they're also looking at the area as well at the same time. They've also got a consultant, so we've combined those two together and we have regular catch-ups with them and we'll be combining the consultation together as well, so both parties are getting what they need out of it. There's that part of it, and then there's some of the traffic modelling as well that forms part of that project. So yes, we're looking at having a community meeting as a kick-off to that in the next 3 to 4 weeks, and then at some stage there, once we've gathered some of the data together and have got together draft reports, we'll come back to council as well, so that council will have an opportunity to have a look at that.
Any further questions? Councillor Dean.
Thanks, Mayor. A question about the sport and recreation strategy that we endorsed in December of last year. We signalled that we would put that out to public comment following that endorsement. So I'm just wondering if we get an update on when that will go out for public comment and how the community might have an opportunity to provide feedback.
Yep, we don't have Mr Smee with us, but I think the General Manager will probably have the answer.
Through you, Mayor, I wish I did have the answer. We'll take that on notice, Councillor Dean, and we'll not only provide the answer in the minutes, but we will email all councillors tomorrow with the answer.
I actually understand from Ms Adams, who's sitting in the corner, not that we put her there in the corner deliberately, that it's actually starting tomorrow.
Yeah, I was going to ask that just to clarify. I should have clarified, is it being released tonight?
It is.
Fantastic, that's really good to know, and maybe we can put it on the minutes anyway, so it's for the next meeting. And just a second question, not related to that. In terms of local government review, lots of people are reading news about in the northwest about potential mergers and councils potentially open to some kind of merger happening. We last year endorsed a position that we would be open to talking to the Huon Valley Council. It's been maybe 7 or 8 months, so I'm just wondering how those negotiations with the Huon Valley Council have since gone in the time that we passed that.
I don't know that the word negotiations is probably the right word. We were hoping to have some discussions, but the Huon Valley Council made a decision some time ago that they wanted to actually have a discussion with Derwent Valley Council, which is a very interesting strategic move because they believe that they have more things in common with the Derwent Valley than they do with Kingborough because of the more rural nature of the Derwent Valley. I did happen to just very briefly yesterday see Mayor Sally Doyle, and she did say, I'm going to give you a ring, and so I think they have made their Huon Valley have made their position very clear in relation to not wishing to merge with Kingborough. So I'll wait and see what discussion we have when the Mayor contacts me.
Yep. I guess just to clarify then, Derwent Valley merging with Huon Valley, that wasn't part of the Western Shore. Was that one of the options? It wasn't?
No, it wasn't. It was something that they came up with themselves, and I believe that Derwent Valley were happy to talk to them. Okay. So, it's an interesting scenario, and not one that anybody else had thought of at any point during the 2-year review. So it's kind of come out of left field.
And maybe just one last update. The other two options that we discussed last year was around Bruny Island and Taroona being potentially sold by the Hobart City Council. So was there any update on negotiations there? Not negotiations, any update on contact or discussions with other councils?
So not at the moment, because the review is still out for public comment until the 29th of February. And we're yet to put our submission in, so that'll be coming to the next council. Yeah, so our submission will come to the next council meeting. I think the issue is that given the Huon Valley appear to have closed the door on merging with us, one of the things that we will need to consider in our response to the review suggested that Taroona could go into Hobart, but I would have some serious concerns about losing Taroona if we're not gaining the Huon Valley, because it would erode our ratepayer base significantly. So that's the sort of conversation we need to have to form our response to the review. Yeah,
thanks a lot. Cheers.
Any further questions? No. Okay, going. At the time the agenda was compiled, there were no questions on notice from councillors. The open session of council now adjourns, and the Planning Authority commences at 5:42 p.m. Officers' reports to Planning Authority. We've got a development application for the partial demolition and alterations to dwelling, separate deck with spa and sauna, and change of use of dwelling to visitor accommodation at 322 Tinderbox Road, Tinderbox, with a recommendation on page 21. I'm looking for a mover and a seconder. I've got a mover in the Deputy Mayor, seconder in Councillor Fox. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. The proposal is to convert the existing dwelling to visitor accommodation, thereby creating a second visitor accommodation building on the site. In addition, it is proposed to alter and modify the existing building. Historically, there have been some compliance issues, which this new DA seems to address and iron out. There are 11 advice clauses, which seemed quite a few to me, and 15 conditions, which form part of the permit, dealing with a range of things like length of time that guests can stay, parking arrangements, exterior cladding, vegetation, the spa, wastewater and erosion. Having read through the report thoroughly, I feel comfortable with supporting this development application, and I wish the owners well with their accommodation business.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Midgley.
Thank you. I will support this one. I think the report is really easy to read and follows such succinct outlines in regards to the permit, and then the spa issue and the fire risk and that sort of thing, and also the representations. I thought they were really thoroughly responded to. Like, I know it's outside of the planning authority, but it is always a shame when people put a whole house to visitor accommodation, just to put that on record. I guess in regards to and also just noting the many things, I guess, that have to be approved before they finally come back for final endorsement. And one of those, I guess, is the wastewater of the hot tub. And that is an issue, I guess, that requires further investigation. Can I just kind of understand that process and how it works, please, through you, Mayor?
Thank you. Ms Tullamore.
Through you, Mayor, there's a couple of matters with this. The compliance matters are ongoing. They haven't been resolved by this permit. We do, as you'd be familiar with, have applications that include retrospective works, but that's been put to the side. It was raised in the representations about the issues with the existing visitor accommodation that's on site and where that wastewater is going. And it was the detail should have been shown on the plans, but wasn't, and unfortunately must have got picked up earlier. We think it's fairly low risk, so we're comfortable to have it as a condition of the permit that they'll need to submit it. So it's no imposition on them because they would have to do it anyway. They need to do it for the building permit as well, and it's important that wastewater is contained or treated correctly on site so as not to cause issues off site or into the natural environment.
Councillor Midgley.
Thank you. And not sure if this is outside of my role as a planning authority, but just noting that the point about bushfire-prone areas do not apply to visitor accommodation. And if I can just get an explanation to this and how we can help to mitigate this, I guess, in the future. Is it more a state government matter that needs to be raised?
Ms Tyler Moore.
Through you, Mayor, the planning scheme has the bushfire-prone overlay code in it, which is stipulated by the state government, the area of it. It also stipulates when and on what occasions it would apply, so it includes certainly subdivision and vulnerable uses. They haven't included visitor accommodation, which is unusual considering they're still at risk, people to be in there. So with respect to the planning application, we look at the bushfire requirements because if they need to remove vegetation to achieve the bushfire requirement, which is under the Building Act, it's best to deal with it before, rather than just leave it till later and then have to come back for another application, or it's another issue, or they have to move the building. So it's proactive to do it. Again, it's not asking for anything additional because they need it for their building permit anyway.
Yep. Thanks. Thank you, Mayor.
Any further contributions? Councillor Cordova.
Thanks, Mayor. I guess, maybe I'd like to tease out some of those questions because I think that those are basically the main issues that I picked up on this were. So I realise what it says on page 5 regarding the unauthorised works, that the deck with spa and sauna facilities and connecting stairs associated with the existing approved visitor accommodation do not have required authorisation. I realise that's being treated separately. My question really is around what disincentives exist to prevent, for example, this entire development from taking place without authorisation. So what mechanisms does council have to actually make sure that the planning approval processes are gone through? What do we do? And what are the compliance and enforcement mechanisms that we're going to implement on this proposal?
Ms Tyler Moore.
Through you, Mayor, as I understand the question is what mechanisms are there to stop people just building what they want to build?
Yep.
We do rely on neighbours to tell us. Obviously, we've got 33,000 properties, we can't keep an eye on them all. So we often find that residents report them, staff report them, staff who are visiting other sites who see something that's unusual will report it and will investigate it. So what is the deterrent? The deterrent is that you can be prosecuted and you can certainly receive infringement. So the infringements are quite high. They're stipulated under the state government how many penalty units. We choose how we apply those infringements. So you could have 5 offences. You've cut down trees, you've built a house, you've occupied the house, and you've built a dam. So we could penalise you for each of those. If you're a commercial one, if the infringement is close to $13,000, and that changes each year because it's stipulated by the state government. For an individual, it's around $3,500. We don't tend to always do it on all of them. We might do warnings on some, fine on others, and if you don't comply or your offence is so significant, we can prosecute as well, which obviously our preference is really to get compliance. We're not out there to make the money out of it or to be heavy-handed with it. And that's why we do allow occasions that if it's a retrospective permit, depending on what the nature of it is and the severity or the risk, or also should they know better, if you're a builder and you build a house without a permit, well, you know better, so that's treated differently. So they're the sorts of deterrents that are out there. With respect to other offences of buildings, that we have an ongoing communications plan through which is more under the Building Act, but it certainly is that communication, and we have that scheduled for the entire year where we note things such as pools constructed without fences, on-site wastewater that's failing, outbuildings and so forth. So we do have that proactive action as well within the broader department.
Thank you.
Cordova.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, that's really helpful. And am I correct that if you're a proponent of a development, any given proposal such as this one, even if you have a track record of ignoring or disregarding planning approvals processes, even if you have a kind of poor track record, each DA is treated separately. So your poor track record in the past is not factored into judgments on DAs that developer might do in the future.
Ms Tyler-Moore.
Through you, Mayor, each DA is assessed on its merits. We don't tar them with the past. If we were undertaking enforcement and it was to end up at the Magistrates Court, it certainly would be brought into presentation to the magistrate that these offences had occurred, because the magistrate then determines what the penalty is and whether the conviction is recorded against that person. So just same with any other criminal activity, that all builds the case for it, but each DA we assess on its merits, and we certainly hope that everyone's doing the right thing.
Thank you.
Councillor Cordova.
Through you, Mayor. Thank you. My next question around the bushfire is essentially, am I correct that we alert the Tas Fire Service to then make assessments? There was one line in the report regarding this issue of having a fire pit with unsupervised, potentially inexperienced people who aren't used to bushfire settings, maybe because they're tourists, they don't really understand what a tinderbox might be, although the name might give it away. But what are we doing to make sure that all of that is checked, that we're mitigating risk where it's possible for us to mitigate risk, and what role will the TFS play in making sure that whatever happens on that site is actually safe for the neighbours and for the people who are visiting that site?
Ms Tyler-Moore.
Through you, Mayor, no, the TFS wouldn't be typically involved in an assessment like this one. For this particular matter, they were asked a question because it had to do with the Director's determination under the Building Act, so that was very specific, and that's one of those cases where we don't entirely know, so we do seek advice from an external referral authority, which we've had recent discussions about in the previous meeting. Even so far as this, it's up to the owner, the developer, has to appoint a bushfire practitioner who comes up with what the plan is, and it may include things about information and so forth, but we don't really have a say in that. We would certainly hope that anyone that's offering a visitor accommodation is telling them things like, you need to take your rubbish away, you need to be respectful of the community, all those sorts of things that would include the fire pit. But the planning scheme has got nothing specific about fire pits. In real life, we know the risks of it, but the planning scheme can't really regulate something like that.
Councillor Cordova.
Okay, thank you very much. And through you, Mayor, just one more question, and then I've only got one paragraph to summarise this whole thing, so I'm nearly done. An important paragraph, I thought, was at 2.5.7 at the top of page 19, and it refers to the notion that even though it looks like this is a whole home dwelling that's being taken off long-term rental into visitor accommodation, which comes with its known issues, that can't really be assessed under this planning scheme. My question is around, it does say that in the absence of any applicable approved council policy for the management and approval of such accommodation, the rental crisis should not influence town planning assessments by planning authorities. My question is am I correct in thinking that it is in fact possible for Kingborough Council, when not acting as a planning authority, it is possible for councillors to pass constraints such as short stay caps on whole dwelling short stay accommodation, or bans in certain areas, or time limits, like I think Byron Bay has a maximum of 60 nights per year that you can do short stay accommodation, or differential rates like Hobart has. Am I correct that Kingborough Council does actually have the capacity to lean in and create such a policy?
Ms Tyler-Moore.
Through you, Mayor, through the planning scheme there's not. I think the comment is more referring to if council was to advocate to the state government about capping and dealing with the rental crisis. Yes, there are other jurisdictions, other countries and other states that have limitations about visitor accommodation. That doesn't exist in Tasmania. City of Hobart has obviously done a lot of work in that space to try and limit the numbers on that. And there was one other point you made that I had an answer to, but in short, not through the planning scheme until there's a bigger change at the state level.
Thank you.
Councillor Cordova.
And so through you, Mayor, that's because of IPD 6, basically the interim planning directive, the ministerial planning directive that said, is that correct? That it's to do with
Ms Tyler-Moore.
The IPD 6 is the same weight as the planning scheme, so that didn't particularly cause it, because before that existed, we still couldn't cap and refuse visitor accommodations if there wasn't a justified reason.
Thank you.
Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'll just conclude by saying that ultimately, as you can read quite very clearly in the report, it's a good report, that this proposal is compliant with the planning scheme, so I won't be voting against it, thanks only really to those conditions that are placed upon it as part of the approval. However, it is known, and I reaffirm that whole dwelling short stay visitor accommodation in residential areas which have a low residential vacancy rate are known to exacerbate the housing crisis and contribute to home shortages. This decision, should it pass right now, appears to be taking one extra long-term rental off the market in a region where the residential vacancy rate is 1.1%, when it should be more like 3 or 4% in order to stop unsustainable rent increases. So that is potentially problematic, and therefore it does require state government intervention to rethink those planning policies, as we've just heard about the planning scheme in IPD 6. We need to rethink rent caps and curbs on whole home short stay permits, and as a state election seems imminent, if the government won't do it, I think that it's appropriate that the voting base asks whoever the next government is to appropriately regulate whole home short stay accommodation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cordova. Any further contributions? Deputy Mayor, did you want to sum up? No. I'll put the recommendation. It's as printed on page 21 of the agenda, moved by the Deputy Mayor and seconded by Councillor Fox. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Motion is carried unanimously. The Planning Authority now adjourns at 5:57 p.m. and the open session of Council recommences at 5:57 p.m. Takes us to page 50. Petitions received in the last period. At the time the agenda was compiled, no petitions had been received. Still on page 50, we've now got officers' reports to Council. Consent to lodgement of application to allow development to build habitable building and outbuilding outside the building area at 14B Bonnievale Drive, Howden, with a recommendation on page 53. I'm looking for a mover and a seconder, please. Move, Councillor Gladright. Seconder, Councillor Bain. Councillor Gladright.
Thank you. So we are considering a request by the owner to allow the construction of a 4-bedroom dwelling, which would be located partially outside the building area, and an outbuilding sited wholly outside the building area, a total area of 45 metres squared. We have two choices before us, either to grant or refuse, and it is being recommended to us to grant consent and is a pragmatic solution to the limitations of the building area and lot characteristics. My questions, though, are, firstly, are these requests common?
Ms. Tyler-Moore.
Through you, Mayor, it's not uncommon. We've had a number of these requests to Council, including, I believe, one for this estate area. So they do occur from time to time for different reasons, depending on what the restriction is.
Okay, and so what sort of precedent are we creating which may come back to haunt us by allowing this?
Ms. Tyler-Moore.
Through you, Mayor, I don't believe it really sets a precedent because it's being considered on the merits of the property and that it is still achieving the main objective, which was to do with bushfire and vegetation protection. So you couldn't easily just take that to another property. It would have to be assessed properly.
Deputy Mayor.
And what about neighbours, though? If neighbours are seeing, oh, well, it happened over there, so we'd like to do it over here, does that happen, or there's not really a risk of that?
Ms. Tyler-Moore.
Through you, Mayor, not really, because they may very well fit within their envelope. A lot of those are built already anyway. There's not many vacant sites left, and they would still need to achieve it. So, as an example, if you're familiar with the site, there is a site plan in the report. The properties that are closer to the vegetation, it may be more difficult, so we may not find it appropriate to support that if they can't achieve what the objective is.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
That's all, thanks.
So, any further contributions? Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just briefly make the point that I think what convinced me at the bottom of page 52, 4.8, as the bushfire and vegetation protection issues have been appropriately addressed, there is no other planning reason to refuse consent under the covenant, as the provisions of the scheme will control whether a residential building is appropriate for the site and the form in which it is built. So I think this is indeed a pragmatic step, and I don't have a problem with it. Cheers.
Thank you. Any further discussion? I take it you don't want to sum up? No, I'll put the recommendation now. It's moved by Councillor Gladright, seconded by Councillor Bain. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Motion is carried unanimously. Takes us to page 118, Kingborough Environmental Fund Implementation Plan, with a recommendation on page 123. Give for a mover and a seconder. I've got a mover in Councillor Gladright, seconder in Councillor Midgley. Councillor Gladright.
Thank you. The purpose of this report is to consider and endorse the second iteration of the Kingborough Environmental Fund Implementation Plan. The fund has a total of $720,000, which is now ready for the next stage of implementation. Kingborough Council's guidelines for the expenditure of the Kingborough Environmental Fund provides a transparent and consistent framework for the expenditure of the funds in a manner consistent with the biodiversity offset policy. The funds are managed by a steering committee, and to date the fund has been responsible for protecting a total of 242.9 hectares of high conservation land across 6 covenants. I feel really proud of the achievements of this fund, and I congratulate everyone involved. I will proudly support this tonight, noting that this next stage will be targeting stewardship of existing and new conservation covenants, 2 new private land reserves, 3 new revegetation projects, education or protection measures, and a conservation project. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gladright. Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor. I also echo the sentiments shared by Councillor Gladright and thank all the staff involved. This really thorough report and moving forward on the Kingborough Environmental Fund Implementation Plan. And for the public, we, as noted before, we had a workshop on Monday. It was last Monday night. That was, really gave us a really great outline of the plan and moving forward of what we've achieved and what the future looks like. So I really encourage people who are listening, and I'll definitely tell people who are asking me about it, to read the report, because it really gives that understanding of, why we set it in the first place, how it's implemented, how we're collecting the fund, who does what, and I guess the governance behind the steering committee overseeing the funds and the outcomes that we hope to achieve and the outputs as well of what we're looking for the future. We are a growing municipality, and we're, that's that balance. I think it mentioned somewhere in the report around the amazing biodiversity that Kingborough has, but also that that we are growing as well, and we need we need homes for people to live, but we also have, that it mentions on page 118, there's a direct link between decreasing vegetation cover arising from changing land use and urban development and the high number of species becoming threatened or a species threatened status being upgraded has been the case with the swift parrot. So we absolutely know that, and this fund recognises that. And as Councillor Gladright stated, there's a whole range of outputs that we are doing to help somehow to mitigate that, and hopefully in the future we can see numbers increasing, and hopefully this fund has a direct output of that as well. Noting on page 120, you can look through and see the many list of projects that we have protected, revegetated, and the threatened species recovery actions as well on page 120 at the end there, and the statement around the environment on page 122, where it states the endorsement of the Kingborough Environmental Fund Implementation Plan will result in the continued realisation of financial offsets held by Council since 2004, and these offset actions will result in investment and new opportunities for conservation on private land and funding of critical threatened species recovery actions such as research, education and new areas of revegetation on public land. The people that speak to me in the shops and when I'm out at events and things like that, they notice the high conservation trees that are lost, especially in our urban areas. We tend to see it more, and people, ask me what's happening. And I guess in regards to and I did ask this at the councillor workshop, and I will, just so we can have this, I guess, on public record as well, in regards to people seeing these high conservation trees that are lost, and we're seeing kind of concrete developments that are happening, and we know that there is an offset due to those loss of the high conservation trees. How do we explain that to the public to note that council is sort of has this fund in place, and what sort of communication will we be looking at for the future around that?
Ms Quinn.
Through you, Mayor. Thank you for that question. Yeah, as we discussed at the workshop, the Environmental Fund is going into a new phase of a communication plan to make sure that we're communicating really clearly what the link is between when we lose biodiversity due to a development and then where that offset site is. So at the moment, Council's website does have photos and explanations of where the offset sites are, but there isn't a direct link for people necessarily about where the loss was. So the new communications plan is going to improve that and make a stronger link. And the other thing that we've talked about is potential signage at some of the offset sites which are associated with revegetation because they're on council land. So where someone may have needed to remove a high conservation value tree, and that has been approved by council. Council has put in place a number of revegetation sites which are going incredibly well, so people can visit those reserves and make that link between the loss and where those trees are now growing.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Just one further question, noted again in the report. I'm just trying to find my notes actually around just the criteria of avoid, actions to minimise and then unavoidable offset. I'm just wondering, Mayor, if the staff might just like to explain that for anybody listening.
Ms Quinn.
Through you, Mayor, absolutely. So it's really important to understand that biodiversity offsetting is always the last thing that we might try to do when avoiding vegetation removal. So if someone comes to council and wants to do a development of some sort and needs to remove vegetation, the first thing we try to do is avoid that loss. So that might be locating it somewhere different on the block, making it smaller, so some sort of design change, and to minimise those offsets. The other thing we try to do is to offset on-site first, so the biodiversity offset policy that council has, make sure that we try where it is possible, where people have a large enough block of land, that the offset site is actually on the site where the loss has occurred, because that's the best outcome for biodiversity. And where we can't do that, that's where the Kingborough Environmental Fund comes into place, because that's when people pay a financial offset for very small residual offsets where we haven't been able to either completely avoid the loss in the first place or do an on-site offset. So it is the smallest piece of the pie, if you like.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion? Councillor Antoli.
Thank you, Mayor. I have some questions and I'd like to make a contribution. There is concern from the community that the steering committee of the fund is quite, I don't even know if it's the right word to use, interlinked maybe, that it's a lot of environmental groups and Kingborough staff. How do we communicate to the community that it is properly managed and accountable, given that those interconnections? Are there people, for example, on the committee who have strong financial, strong legal, as opposed to just environmental background?
Ms Quinn.
Through you, Mayor. The makeup of the steering committee, in terms of the types of skill sets that we're after, is outlined in the in the plan. And so people will be able to see that, because the stage 1 plan is on the website, and if endorsed tonight, this stage 2 plan will be on the website as well, so they can see what that makeup is. The skill sets for the fund are predominantly around making sure that we're making the correct choices around the offset sites, so they're scientific guidance predominantly, and also in terms of making sure that the fund is following the regional offset guidelines, which says that the offsets, the criteria, they must be like for like, and they must be close to the offset site, and all of those things that make it a rigorous offset. The financial and legal side of the fund is predominantly, and this is set out in the plan as well, is managed by council itself and by the general manager as the project owner. And so that's what the project plan sets out. And so we use council's own governance structure, which is the General Manager, who then, of course, reports to the Council at the moment to administer that the governance for the financial and legal. The steering committee, though, is made up of very experienced people, and so it's the members, for example, from the state government, from, as you say, there's some from Kingborough Council, from regional organisations, so those people all, of course, bring that expertise as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Antoli.
Thank you, Mayor. I do agree with the previous comment made by Manager Environmental Services that the communication side, the stakeholder, the community consultation side needs to really ramp up. The fund itself is quite innocuous. For people that have issues with the entire biodiversity concept, it's really the front end, which is the policy itself, that causes the most consternation. The fund itself is quite morally neutral. Ethically neutral. It's actually just trying to lift biodiversity and spend money, which I think we can all agree with. We want that. How it's implemented, whether that spend is on new revegetation or Part 5 agreements to protect existing land that is yet to be, so that it can't be sold in the future, is really driven by the actual policy itself. So what is the plan to help, I think, demystify the fund itself while Council works on the bugs in the policy per se, if I can put it that way?
Ms Quinn.
Through you, Mayor. So one thing we're looking at doing, and this has been supplied to councillors, is to make a closer link between about the reconciliation of the funds. So where people have needed to provide a financial offset into the fund, make sure that those individuals are able to then find out, which they can at the moment because they can call council, but make it easier for those individuals to find out where those offset sites are.
Great.
In the landscape. Yep.
And if I may, I have another question before I just break off into a contribution. There's a lot of interest about where the money comes from and how large are the allotments, and I'm very grateful to the Director for some of those figures that came through last minute today. A lot of people feel that there's huge, large parcels, $40,000 plus on a regular basis going in there, and the evidence shows that those sorts of large influxes of cash, there's probably about 3 or 4. There's 150,000 in there that came once from a large development. How can we communicate? Are we permitted to communicate some of those numbers openly to the community, anonymise it, so that they can understand that the parcels that go in there, the majority are like $500 or $1,500. When I say majority, I'm talking about 90-something%. How can we do that to show that it's not the fund itself that's the demon to them?
Ms Shakuti.
Through you, Mayor. We're, as Ms Quinn just alluded to, we are working through that plan at the moment. So we recognise there is a need in the community to see the link between the money that may have been paid because of the development application and any biodiversity loss associated with that, and then what that money has then been spent on. So we are in the early stages of working through that, and it will be, as previously indicated, in a format that the public can understand. Obviously the numbers are quite complex, so we will be working through that to create a format, and I imagine it'll be available potentially on our website or other means that we see fit as well. So we're not quite sure at this stage, but it's work we are doing.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Antoli.
Thank you. My contribution is that I'm going to be supporting this implementation plan. There's a couple of reasons why. The first is I actually think it helps explain what it does far better than anything else we've produced. I think there's a real commitment to demystify it. And I'm grateful for the workshop that we had last week because that helped me. There's a huge perception out there that people are being asked regularly to put in $40,000 plus into the fund to get their DA approved. And I think those stories might happen once or twice. They're quite spectacular stories. They become part of folklore, and I think they metastasise and start to tarnish the fund with the reputation it doesn't deserve. Having said all that, it's the biodiversity offset policy, and sort of to quote a colleague of mine here around this table, the fund's neutral, the problem's with the front end, in my view. It's the biodiversity offset policy itself, its reliance. It's quite strict. Financial offsets are quite uncommon in Tasmania. In fact, they're quite rare. On the mainland, they're very common because in the mainland, you've got councils have huge populations in urban areas where trees and vegetation are an absolute premium. In Tasmania, we have our state locked up 40% as natural protected parks. We live in a huge electorate here where we've only got about 41,000 people. So it can be argued that the fund, whose job is to receive the monies from the policy and fairly revegetate and improve the biodiversity as much as we can. I think that's laudable. I think that's something to be approved and applauded. It comes down to the policy itself, and I think that's where the work needs to happen this year. I believe that is work that we are going to be doing to make sure that it's not ambiguous, to make sure that it's as objective as possible, and to make sure that it's actually in line with expectations of our community. If we lived in Melbourne and trees in the heart of Melbourne, where I believe it's something like $30,000 as an financial offset to remove one tree, whereas here I think it's 500, something like that, or in that realm, I think. Thank you, they're nodding yes. You can understand why. So to try and translate those sorts of numbers here is demonstrably unfair and draconian, and I'm not saying anyone here is proposing that. So I just think that it's the financial... I think you'd find this fund, for example, a lot more palatable with the community if the Part 5s on their land that they are required to sign to get the DA approved is managed by the monies in the fund. The weeding part of it, the fencing part of it. Right now we're a bit all care, no responsibility when it comes to Part 5 agreements. It would be nice if this fund could contribute to things like that, which is currently not in its remit. So I'm going to vote for it, but I just wanted the community to understand why I'm voting for it, because there are a lot of people that, shall we say, I represent who have concerns, and it's right for me to represent their concerns, but in the same way educate them where their concerns might be wrong, because they'll listen to me and they won't listen to maybe somebody else coming with the same message. But the message back to council is that I think we really need to do a lot of work this year on the offset policy itself. So, and I just want to thank the officers who actually work for us. Another lie is that the fund funds compliance officers who go out there and cause havoc, and the community doesn't. Those compliance officers are funded completely separate. It's actually funds a couple of lonely souls out there who are actually doing the digging, the scraping and the revegetating, which I think is commendable. So I do want to thank those good people doing that work. And that's it from me.
Thank you very much. Councillor Richardson.
Thank you. I just wanted to touch on the financial side of it. So we've got 1.2 million that we've collected over 20 years. We've spent less than half at 550,000. Okay. Just on a quick count, that was collected from 538 developments or properties, that $1.2 million. And the revegetation or the remediation, whatever it is, has occurred on 6 properties. So we've I was going to say penalised, but I won't. We've taken biodiversity offsets from 538 properties and then put back into but 6. Can we talk to that a little, please?
Ms. Quinn.
Through you, Mayor, that is absolutely correct, and there's a very good reason for it. So the reason that there are many small offsets, as Councillor Antoli spoke about, are required to be pulled together to make an efficient conservation reserve. So if we tried to take a $5,000 input into the Kingborough Environmental Fund and do something meaningful with it, we'd end up wasting a lot of money and not getting a very good biodiversity offset out of it. So what we did, hence the time lag, is wait for those funds to actually pull together and make it worth it to employ an officer to then implement the fund. Otherwise, we would have just been doing really ad hoc type offsetting, and that's not what we want to do here at Kingborough. So the reason that there's only 6 covenants that are required is those covenants are large and they protect the values that were lost. So the important thing is not what the dollars are necessarily. I know I'm not saying dollars aren't important, because of course they are. I'm saying in terms of an outcome of an offset, for it to be a good offset, the values that are lost, so if it's 5 hectares that are lost, need to equal the values that are put back into the environment. So what we've done with the fund is put out an expression of interest to landowners and said, would you like to be part of the Kingborough Environmental Fund and help us meet our targets? We were overwhelmed with people who wanted to do that, and we ended up selecting 6 sites that the state government have agreed are of a standard that can go into the, as conservation covenants, can then go into the National Reserve Estate. So those 6 properties are covering off more than the values that were lost. Does that answer the question?
Councillor Richardson.
Yeah, thank you. And two-parter, is that expression of interest process still open? Is it something that's perpetually open? And how, if we've got landowners, private landowners who think that they may have the values that could be managed from the fund, how would they get in contact and put their land forward?
Ms Quinn.
Through you, Mayor. Yeah, the expression of interest form is on our website and we haven't taken it down. So initially, of course, we had that large pool of money when we were doing the initial Part 1 plan. And so that's when we actually advertised that and actually had quite a good call for people. So now the expression of interest sits there, and we're certainly very interested in hearing from people, because there are still covenants that we need to find as part of this stage 2 plan. But we don't necessarily need a whole lot of people anymore. What we tend to do is, with those people who have expressed interest, is put them into the network of other organisations like NRM South, the regional organisations and the state government, and let them know that there's other ways of seeking a conservation covenant on their property if they'd like to do that.
Further contributions? Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question, which is, we didn't cover it during the workshop, about which other jurisdictions are considered to be best practice, and do we share notes or learnings from them back and forth? In addition to the research component, which I thought was very impressive, I'm just interested to know if the framework of the implementation plan is informed by jurisdictions elsewhere.
Ms Quinn.
Through you, Mayor. We don't, in Tasmania, Kingborough Council in local government is leading in this space. We certainly talk to the state government really regularly. So the state government is in the business of using biodiversity offsets through large projects that it deals with and regulates, in terms of like wind farms and mines, and also forest practices. The Forest Practices Authority also deals with biodiversity offsets. So we have developed our policies and guidelines with them, and we continue to talk with them. We don't do that outside of Tasmania. We certainly do research, but we don't have a strong network yet.
Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. My contribution, I'd like to start by sincerely thanking the Natural Areas and Biodiversity team for their hard work, their passion, their effective planning and implementation of critical projects to protect Kingborough's impressive natural values. Visiting one of those conservation covenant sites and seeing in situ the protection, the remarkable biodiversity and natural values present was one of the more uplifting days on the job for me so far in my time on council. And to know they're in the National Reserve Estate is uplifting. There are many positive news stories that I look forward to us sharing through that communications plan we've heard about. We need to remember that when we do invest in our environment, an investment in protecting our environment is very much an investment in protecting ourselves. This implementation plan speaks to our organisation's strategic plan, which identifies the balance that we're trying to strike, sustaining the natural environment whilst facilitating development for our future. This implementation plan shows that we value and prioritise our natural environment whilst encouraging investment and economic growth. We're a council that acknowledges the existence of a biodiversity and climate change emergency. We have plans in place to respond. This is our strategic imperative. It's important to note the mitigation hierarchy, as we've heard, that first of all we try and avoid and then we try and minimise. And then we talk about, are they direct or indirect offsets? Are these going to be on-site offsets, or are they going to be off-site offsets? Finally, when all alternatives are exhausted, that's when these financial offsets come into being. They are a last resort. So that's why for me this Kingborough Environmental Fund is good, but it isn't all good news stories, because what the fund represents is it marks a point in time where, as a last resort, a financial offset was required. We collect the money by way of some kind of a Pagovian tax, almost a sin tax for conservation, to spend on projects that protect the natural world. Now, of course, I'd rather that we just invest money to protect the natural world rather than waiting for a developer to lop down a chunk of it before we use their sin tax money to try and protect what's left. The KEF is achieving wonderful preservation and conservation outcomes in a handful of precious places, but the fund itself represents the culmination of thousands upon thousands of individual habitat trees being removed over time in the name of so-called development. And when the offset price of a very high conservation value tree is just $570, it takes a lot of so-called development before you get $1 million in the piggy bank, and it leaves a trail of environmental destruction in its wake. That's not to say we shouldn't do nothing. We must do something, and this is an important something that we must do. With the biodiversity offset policy, the replacement ratio of 5:1, as I read it, means in practical terms that when occasionally a very high conservation value tree, 200 years old, full of nesting hollows, is cut down, where it can't be replaced, it means there's a replacement ratio of 5:1, so 5 seedlings of that same tree species are planted. But I think we can all, any reasonable person can understand the time value of trees, that a 100-year-old tree with nesting hollows, a Eucalyptus obliqua or rubida planted 100 years ago, is of more value than 5 of them planted last week. And masked owl won't nest in a sapling. So that's why it's important that we continually check the veracity of our programs, of our offset claims. For example, guaranteeing that the environmental values that we're trying to protect are indeed of the highest integrity, that the trust in the program is maintained, and that it is indeed based with the scientific integrity that I believe it does have, with that steering committee being very well experienced and knowledgeable. And that's why I previously moved in this council to make it more costly for developers to take down very high conservation value trees. And ultimately, I do think that we will need to rethink offsets, as there should be places that are so precious that we can't just offset our way out of them. Notre Dame Cathedral is one example of a place where even if a developer said, look, I'll knock it down, but I'll replace it with 5 more littler ones, that wouldn't be accepted. It wouldn't be accepted, because it's not the same. And maybe not every tree in Kingborough is a Notre Dame Cathedral, but there is no doubt that our grand trees are monuments to the passage of time. They are a celebration of the creation of life, and the ecosystem services that our trees provide are a gift for which we should be grateful. We depend upon them. I lament how our society in Tasmania 100 years ago just did not have the robust systems in place or the courage of leadership to protect the last thylacine from going extinct. And 100 years from now, people like me will lament the loss of the swift parrot, the masked owl, the Maugean skate, and perhaps the Tasmanian devil, and all the other species that we let go extinct because we didn't do enough to prevent their extinction. We have a responsibility on council to protect what we have. Kingborough is special, Tasmania is special, and we are the stewards of this incredible natural biodiversity. That's why it's so important that we do all we can. That's why it's so important that we invest where we can with a thorough scientific basis to protect what we have left and to leave this place a better off than when we got here. Thanks once again.
Thank you, Councillor Cordover. Any further contributions? Just briefly, because I know we've got a very full agenda, but I just wanted to add my support to this. Like Councillor Cordover mentioned, the opportunity to, about 18 months ago now, to walk around one of the properties that has a covenant on it, and to see the work that had been done was just the best professional development you could ask for in terms of understanding the value of the Kingborough Environmental Fund and what can be achieved. And as the report here shows, to have over 242.9 hectares that have been protected in these covenants is quite remarkable, as well as the revegetation that's occurred and the other recovery actions. So I think that the first implementation plan has certainly achieved and probably exceeded what it set out to achieve, and so we should be very proud of that. And I look forward to seeing what can be achieved with this second plan. And thank you very much to our team of staff who work in this area, and also, can I just add, the workshop, as others have said, was very useful in helping all of us understand it in a more detailed way, and I know we certainly look forward to being able to tell that story to the community and share the wins and get them to understand what this is achieving. So thank you very much. Now, Deputy Mayor, did you want to sum up? No? Okay, I'm going to put the recommendation. It's moved by Councillor Gladright, seconded by Councillor Midgley. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried unanimously. Takes us to page 149, Food Truck Policy Review, with a recommendation on page 152. I'm looking for a mover and a seconder. I've got a mover in Councillor Midgley and a seconder in Councillor Bain. Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor. Happy to move the food truck policy, noting that there's minimal changes to this new edition. A couple of points that were, I thought, of interest in regards to the number of applications over the last few years have really declined. It seemed like, I'm just putting the dates in, pre-COVID it was really booming, wasn't it, food trucks? When I was working in Hobart, across Hobart they were everywhere, and then Kingborough we started to have that boom, and I guess kind of related to COVID they've sort of declined, and I don't know if there's any other factors. I don't know, Mayor, if staff want to share any other sort of things they've heard about why the decline of numbers, or...
Look, we always love to hear from Mr. Reeve.
I know, we do, that's why I'm asking.
So, Mr. Reeve, take it away.
He hasn't been buying enough lunches.
Yeah, maybe. Through you, Mayor, I'm tempted to say that the food lands will be coming back imminently, but unfortunately, I won't be able to say that. No, look, I don't really know. Obviously, they look at it as a business. What we are seeing is a general decline in food truck bans in other locations as well, so it's not just Kingborough. Certainly in the last iteration of this particular policy there, we looked at it with the lens that there probably would be more food truck vans actually trading in Kingborough, and we had a few things in the wings ready to go because of that. But we, I guess, temporarily shelved those things. We can always relook at them later because it has dropped off quite significantly. So as to the reasons behind that, I suggest it's just all down to whether you can make a buck out of it.
Thank
Councillor
you.
Midgley.
Thank you, and yes, no doubt, Mayor, as well, the cost of living. People are probably eating out less and taking lunches and things like that. And I guess just a few points on the document in regards to, what I've written, page 155, putting an image of the food truck. I thought that's a great addition, so you know what you're approving, I guess, what it looks like, what's written on the food truck. Page 156, the addition in regards to, I know that was a discussion that we've had over the years and then got it sort of implemented in regards to the waste, compostable packaging, noting that it's just happening everywhere and it's just a thing now. We don't have to debate it as much as we used to, so that's really great. And just that addition of the reapplying and the intention to cease trading. So I guess just those comms that the food trucks have for council. So yeah, I support the permit, and let's get out to a food truck soon.
Thank you. Further contributions, Councillor Cordova and then Councillor Antoli.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm supportive of the policy, and it's good. It's a shame that there's not more at the moment, but we'll wait and see. I mean, there's a macroeconomic environment that is affecting all of these things. But my question is around noise and how the policy ensures that noise related to trade doesn't constitute a public nuisance, as we can see at page 162, but just in a kind of a practical way, how do we actually make sure, firstly, have there been any noise complaints related to food trucks, and secondly, what do we do to intervene when there are allegations that noise is a problem?
Mr. Reeve.
Through you, Mayor, so if we do get any complaints about that and we don't generally get complaints about this. I think from memory I can only point to one, and that was quite a while ago, just to generate a noise more than anything. But if we do get any complaints, then we can investigate that through our environmental health area, and then if anything necessarily needs to be done with that, we go from there. But look, very few complaints, and obviously with less food truck vans out there, probably even more unlikely to have complaints.
Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for that answer. That's good to hear. My other question was around the alternative sites that are available. So a food truck can apply to be in an alternative site that isn't the one listed. Just wondering if there have been any interest, maybe in the times when there were more food trucks around. The thrust of my question is: have we chosen the sites that we've chosen as the standard sites? Are they really the best ones? Has the community come back with any alternative suggestions?
Mr. Reeve.
Through you, Mayor. Not really. I mean, every now and again you might get a query from someone who might want to trade in a bit more of an unusual location for whatever reason. When it was at its boom time, everybody wanted to trade down at Kingston Beach. Now, nobody wants to trade down at Kingston Beach. So it's quite fickle in terms of that side of things. I guess the policy does allow for any sort of location to be looked at as long as it's not prohibited. So, yeah, not a lot.
Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just conclude by saying that I do hope these pick up. I think there's obviously a balance that needs to be struck to make sure that local businesses are protected, but at the same time that the consumer gets maximum choice and convenience, and also the benefits for the economy of having just more trade taking place in an environmentally sustainable way. That's really good to see. I guess I was going to kind of unpack more about how we can strategically use food trucks to enliven and enrich spaces in terms of like cultural festivities. I know that this is separate from the events policy, I realise that, but I'm just saying that maybe if there was more demand from food truck operators, then we could start strategically talking about, well, if we encourage a whole bunch of people to park their food trucks down at this part of Kingston Park or that part of the beach or this part of Margate, then we could really enrich and enliven these spaces. But I think obviously the demand from the operators just isn't there at the moment. So my fingers are crossed that picks back up. I think the policy is good, it's fit for purpose, and it's one of those things that we'll keep iterating and we'll keep developing, hopefully when the demand picks up. But at least we've done our homework so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cordova. Councillor Antoli.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mayor. I have a few questions. The first is around the fee that we charge. I believe it's roughly in the realm of about $1,000 or thereabouts, $1,100 a year, which seems to be on par with some of the other jurisdictions around. Is that a recent change, a recent shift, or has the fee been at that level for quite a while?
Mr. Reeve.
Through you, Mayor. No, it's been at that level for a little while. So we did a research right at the very beginning when we first brought this policy in about 4 years or so ago, and looked at other councils and where they were putting their fees at, or the ones that did actually have a policy. So we actually plumped ours in that sort of area, and now we've only really been just increasing it like a CPI increase since then. So it's been sitting fairly stable in terms of the fee.
Thank you. The next question is around page 164. There's a table there. It's a trading alternative trading locations table. So it talks about how these sites are public spaces. They're not food truck spaces, but there's from my point of view, a bit of a restriction, a bit of a limit. So we're allowing a certain number of food trucks to be there, I believe, simultaneously. Is that what that site food truck limit means?
Mr. Reeve.
Premier, yeah, no, that's correct.
And there's a maximum trading day per week. Is the trading day per week too small, too limited? Are we restricting their ability to earn an income? Because as we know, in any given week that you and I work, I think it's the first 3 or 4 days we pay taxes and the rest is our money. Is it a similar situation for those that we're just not giving them enough days to actually earn a living?
So I might be able to help with that one, because the last time for those councillors who were here previously when we considered this policy, we had quite a lot of interest from the business owners, particularly in Kingston Beach, and the concerns that they had that the food trucks were taking away from their revenue base because people would choose to get a $10 burger from a food truck instead of a $15 burger sitting down in a restaurant. And so because at that stage there was so much demand for food trucks, the agreement that we reached as sort of the compromise position was that we would limit the number of days so that it was still giving the option of food trucks, but not in a way that would, I guess, unfairly penalise the businesses who are paying rates and rent and employing full-time staff and who have significant other commitments than a mobile food truck. Do you want to add anything, Mr. Reeve?
Through you, Mayor. The only thing I'd probably add with that is that I guess this was a lot more relevant when it was a bit more of a boom. There was probably, I think, about 19 at one stage, and it looked like they might even increase from there. And part of it was also to do with, I guess, fairness for the vendors as well at the same time, so that they could sort of share those spaces. I guess at the moment there, it is very low in terms of numbers. In terms of the query about the trading days, we get about 0 inquiries about that. So effectively, that's not an issue for the food truck bans. So it's never been raised as an issue. As I said, there's very few operating. I don't think any of the ones that are operating at the moment are actually operating in those areas, in those alternative locations. So while the numbers are quite small, it's fine. So I guess the policy actually allows for these lower numbers, but also allows for some restrictions if we actually end up getting into the higher numbers as well at the same time. And it's a guideline, because obviously there could be other locations that might be identified by punters out there who wish to actually operate, and then they need to be taken on a case-by-case basis.
Councillor Antoli.
Yeah, thank you. My only comment is I really don't know whether or not a lack of question about something that they know is published and they know what the restrictions are is evidence that they want more. They just know what it is and they probably think it's not. There's maybe no point asking council for more because we know what their answer will be. Look, it's a vexed issue that the Mayor brought up about complaints from the community. Free enterprise is a funny thing. Competition is a funny thing. There's always winners and losers. One could argue that bringing extra foot traffic down there attracts more and more people. People like to be around where there's vibrancy. We'd like to, when we walk down a street and there's a crowd of people looking around an entertainer, it creates more of a crowd. But if there's only one person, you just walk by and move on. And I think there's a real argument to be made that food trucks have their place. And, sitting down, admittedly $15 is not exactly a cheap burger, but it's a different life. You sit down, you have a different need. But if you're just passing by and you're a jogger or you're there with the kids on the beach and you just want to eat and have a snack on the beach, it actually brings more people down there. So I'm sure we could put up an argument for it. To me, it just feels a bit restricted to the... It's almost like we're restricting incentivisation, and I'd love to know who some of these food truck owners are. And I'd like to just talk to them and just sort of say, how can we do better? What's the issue? So I might just do that as private research, and I'll offer that community consultation free of charge to the council. But I'll support this.
Thank you, Councillor Antoli. Before I go to Councillor Richardson and Councillor Bain, I think the other thing that probably... look, I love a good food truck, I've got to tell you. I'm a very enthusiastic supporter of food trucks, and we used to have a lot of them. And I think one of the things that has led to the demise of many food trucks is the increasing reach of Uber Eats. So 4 years ago, when this was put together, Uber Eats didn't... you couldn't get Uber Eats in Kingston. Now you can Uber Eats absolutely anything to your house, and I think that's... People have been actively choosing to do that, where rather than going out to get, they want the food to come to them. So I think that has led to a change. But I'd like to think that there is still a place, that that there is still a role for food trucks. It's just there's such a declining number now. I used to follow a food truck page on social media, and you just don't see them posting. I once drove to a food truck in Glenorchy because I wanted to. I wanted something that they were selling and they weren't coming to Kingborough, so I drove to Glenorchy. Completely insane, I know, but it was a very good dish. But then I also look at what they do in Launceston, where they have they have a food truck street, and they get like six or seven food trucks. And if you actually picked the right area, if you say when they do all the new development at Huntingfield, there's no other restaurants there that is open. If you could have a little section there where you had 3 or 4 food trucks, wouldn't that be great for that community who don't have those options at night time to actually go and, go walk to a nearby restaurant or something like that? So if you're a food truck owner and you're listening, we want you in Kingborough. Councillor Richardson.
Thank you. It's interesting to note that we've talked about from the inception of this policy how the applications have tanked. We've talked about the restrictions that we've put in place. We've talked about the competition that these food trucks are facing, notwithstanding this COVID in the middle, completely understand that. Yet our position as a regulator is to keep increasing fees. We've also talked about how the food trucks potentially add vibrancy and choice and extra foot traffic to our local area. So maybe we should be looking at this a bit differently, given that the numbers are so low. Instead of keeping increasing the fee with CPI, maybe we should be slashing it to try and encourage those food trucks back. Because by their very nature, they are mobile, right? So we've just outlined a bunch of reasons why it's hard to be a food truck. Yet us and every other council are slapping these fees on them and then increasing them. That's not going to encourage anything. So I don't know if it's there's an appetite for an amendment or whether it's something to think about for next time. But I'd like maybe some views on going the opposite way and actually really slashing this to encourage that traffic.
Thank you, Councillor Richardson. Just in terms of the process, our fees and charges are set during the budget process, so we're about to start our round of budget workshops, so that's certainly the opportunity then to have this discussion and consider whether that's something that we'd like to do. Next I had Councillor Bain, then Councillor Antoli. Is your light on? Do you have a question?
Oh, sorry.
No? Okay, so I'll go Councillor Bain and then Councillor Cordova. Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mayor. Definitely happy to support the policy. I think it's great. Just a couple of questions. I noticed that 6.5E we've added in to inform council of their intention to cease trading in the Kingborough food truck program. Just curious, prior to this, was it just a case of if they didn't renew, we knew that they'd finished up?
Mr. Reeve.
Through you, Mayor, I guess there's different types of permits they can actually get, and I guess it's quite it's a bit more pertinent when you have a lot of food truck bans and competition for space is quite high. In which case, if someone's not intending to keep trading, it's useful to actually know that. It's probably less of an issue now where we've had very few people actually take up the offer to actually do this. But it's in there, I guess, just so that we can actually, as a good governance measure, if nothing else there, to actually know that someone has got to the point of actually saying, yes, I may have actually paid for a 12-month permit, but I don't intend to actually trade anymore for the rest of the year.
Councillor Bain.
And just thinking, would it be possible to try and capture their reasoning as to why they're finishing up as part of that, to provide some good feedback to the council?
Through you, Mayor. Yeah, I guess we'd actually ask those questions as well. I mean, I suppose from our perspective, it's useful to actually understand, as Councillor Antoli actually mentioned there, some of the reasonings behind, the food truck bans and why they might want to trade somewhere, why they might not trade in other places, why they might want to cease, those types of things. So if we have the opportunities, we do ask those questions as well. So that helps us inform any sort of future policy directions we might want to put to council.
Councillor Bain.
Thank you. Just one further question. If one of the locations is no longer available to the food vendors, I think, for example, the corner of Spring Farm and Channel Highway opposite Bunnings, if that was to be developed, what's the process there for notifying food vendors? Do we give them lots of notice?
Mr. Reeve.
Through you, Mayor. Look, if we know that something's coming up like that, and it has come up before where there's been temporary work that might be happening there, so it's not appropriate for people to actually trade while temporary work's actually happening. So we'll inform all the food truck owners that that location's now not available, even if it's only for a short period of time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question, and it's around this idea, which I'm agnostic about whether we should lower the fees or not. But the 3-month fee, I assume you'd want to try out a food truck. Maybe you'd get the 3-month license for $381. On a good day at a food truck, you'd make a lot more than $381. I don't think that $381 is necessarily the thing that's stopping it, but maybe it is. And so my question is actually around, can we engage as part of a communications piece, either the Kingborough Huon Business Enterprise Centre, or there's a Tassie Food Trucks Facebook page, the admins of those, there's 7,000 people following it. The admin of that Facebook page probably has a connection with a lot of food trucks. Like, is there some kind of consultation, if we think it's necessary to do it, that we can do to proactively outreach to see whether or not the licensing fee is the actual thing that's stopping it, or whether it's indeed, interest rates and Uber Eats, which sounds very plausible to me. My question is really around, should we actually be doing some proactive outreach?
Mr. Reeve.
Through you, Mayor. Look, we try and do that when we have all of our discussions with the food truck vendors, whether they're actually applying for a new permit or they're ceasing a permit, or whatever it happens to be. There's nothing really to suggest, and nothing really comes up to say, your fees are outrageous, that's the reason why we don't want to actually trade in Kingborough. That's just not the case at all. It's more to do with, generally whether they, as a business, could operate in, a particular location and actually make money out of their business, or whether there's better options for them either outside of the municipality or, on private land or whatever it happens to be. So there's nothing there that suggests that fees are a driver for them to not be operating.
Thank you.
Councillor Cordova, all done? Yep. Any further discussion? Councillor Dean.
Only just to make the quick comment that I did do some little research, but I won't be billing the Kingborough Council for them. No, just to go to my one and only local food truck, and they were very happy and actually super supportive of the author of this report, and very appreciative of the work that they did leading up to the review. So tick to them, and I'll be supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. Councillor Midgley, did you want to sum up?
It's been a robust discussion. It always is around the food trucks. I think those points around the vibrancy and things like that food trucks do bring is something we've definitely addressed before. And that idea that the Mayor raised around Launceston sounded like a great thing. And I know for Howden, I sometimes think maybe we should get a food truck one night. So maybe it's about taking, if you live in those areas, take some initiative and, or find out, of course, from council regarding permits and things like that. But yeah, take initiative and go to your local food truck.
Thanks very much, Councillor Midgley. I'm going to put the motion as printed in the agenda. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried unanimously. That now takes us to page 169, late nomination for community representation on the Kingborough Community Safety Committee, with a recommendation on page 170. I'm looking for a mover and a second. I've got a mover in Councillor Gladright and a seconder in Councillor Street. Councillor Gladright.
Thank you. Yes, so we're considering a late nomination to the Kingborough Community Safety Committee. Miss Ridge was overseas when the nominations were called for, and when she came back she decided to put in a late nomination. We haven't filled all the places. There's still a vacant place on the committee, and Miss Ridge has been a very valuable addition to the committee, and I most definitely endorse her appointment.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion? If not, I'll put the recommendation as printed in the agenda, moved by Councillor Gladright, seconded by Councillor Street. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried unanimously. Takes us to page 171, petition safely connecting Snug with Lower Snug and Conningham with a shared pathway for walkers and cyclists, with a recommendation on page 174. Looking for a mover and a seconder, please. Moved, Councillor Fox. seconded Councillor Cordova.
I was going to suggest just procedurally, Mayor, did we want to discuss it instead? But I've just seconded it, so...
Yeah, no, we're past that point now.
Okay.
So, Councillor Fox.
I think this is a result of a petition which Council received to have a shared path between Snug and Lower Snug, and it's interesting to see how ownership of land has been difficult to negotiate, and that they're looking at alternative sites, and basically it's a summary of the work that's gone into trying to find a way forward, and it's ongoing, and thank the petitioners for raising it with us and hope that this will be resolved in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. Councillor Dean.
My apologies, I was asleep at the wheel. I did want to move an amendment, and I'd forwarded that to councillors and to staff.
That's okay. You can read your amendment and ask the mover and seconder if they would support it.
I can't speak to it. I just need to read it out, right?
Yep.
Yep. Cool. So the recommendation be that the petition is noted, and Council offers progressed negotiations with all stakeholders, including the Department of State Growth, to investigate and determine a viable active transport pathway option between Snug and Lower Snug, noting both Council and the community preferred option is the proposed pathway on the eastern side of the Channel Highway, shown in Figure 1 in the report, and B remains the same.
I'm happy to accept that.
I'm happy to accept it as well.
Okay, great. All right. Look, by the magic of technology and Ms. Lewis, it's now just appeared on the screen, and that will become, as it's been accepted by the mover and seconder, it will become part of the motion, substantive motion, so you can now speak to it.
Brilliant. Thank you everyone for accepting that one. Look, I just put that in because speaking to the petitioner and the community down there, they are obviously very keen that the option that we've now got in there is very much their preferred option. And I note the work and also the petitioner and community members talking about council staff have been so appreciative of what they're doing, and the report absolutely is fantastic and explains the difficulties that have come about in exploring these options. But the reason just to put that in, I wanted to strengthen it just to give them a bit of reassurance that we will do everything we can to get what is clearly a preferable option in terms of not having to cross the Channel Highway, because this is largely around getting a safe network for students and children that were at Snug Primary, and so it makes absolute sense that we try and get the first proposal up if at all possible. I would like to also just put it out there that after exhausting all options that we do go back and we say and we explain as to why, because in those discussions I've also heard that when there was some media done about this, that they were of the understanding that the landowner that it is in question was actually okay to part with the land, and so they weren't too 100% on exactly what has been going on in terms of those negotiations. So it would just be really great if we could, as a council, obviously really push. It's noted here that it is our position, but it's also the community preferred option, that we do everything we can to get that option up and running. And I do also note that State Growth have been sitting on this, for a long time. It's not been a flash in the pan idea. It's been something that the community it makes sense. It's been up there for years. So State Growth haven't jumped at it. So it's clear that, they've got some concerns that it just might not happen. So as a council, I'd really like to see us push to see that first one get off the ground and, sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Dean. Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to my councillor colleague for bringing that amendment. I think this is a really great example of where council can work well with community groups and with community stakeholders to hopefully achieve a really good outcome. And there's no doubt of the key benefits that this proposal would provide, and now it's really about making sure that we get the solution that actually is the one that was auspiced by this very large number, more than 200 people in the community put their name to it, which is something like 14% of the whole population of Snug. It's like a really large proportion, a very good level of engagement, and I think that's a testament to the community group and the work that they've been doing. But I just did want to read out 4.3 on page 172 in case listeners at home haven't read the report, that the project was deemed feasible. However, despite council having a 99-year Crown lease proclaimed in 1973 over the vacant land parcel, further land titles further land titles investigation confirmed the parcel in question was in fact held under a private title of a deceased estate. 4.4. Subsequent land title discussions and investigations have prevented the pathway project from proceeding to viable detailed design and construction. So this is the stage that we're at, that there's this kind of, we're trying to look into it and trying to find some way to overcome that. But whilst we wait for that, I guess it's, this speaks to Councillor Dean's amendment, and why I supported it is because what we want to make sure, from my perspective, is that we don't have people having to cross the highway, and also that we do have in perpetuity for Snug a really strategic part, of the coastline, and that we also, if a speed limit reduction is required, I think that might potentially diminish the appetite within the community. So there's all these kinds of hurdles that the alternative proposal brings with it, whereas the original proposal, the one that's kind of still belonging to this deceased estate, that's really that would be the optimum outcome. So I'm really pleased to be able to progress that and just at least have a clear vision in the moving of this motion that that's what we're trying to achieve as well. So we're on team community on this one, and hopefully we can really achieve something great for the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Cordova. Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to the councillors that have reached out to the Kalska community group as well in regards to the report and the actions and getting this great amendment forward. Just, congratulate the Snug and Conningham community in regards to raising this matter. Like, as we know, it's such an important matter for the health and well-being of community, for the children, and for the local people to be able to walk and cycle safely to school in local areas. And it's kind of, it takes sometimes, they're speaking out for the voices of so many in Snug, and they took this initiative to put this petition forward. So I really want to congratulate them for them, because I know they've been working hard since I've been on council, actually talking about this. So I really wanted to note that and thank them for that. And let's hope we can have a positive solution moving forward. I note that the bicycle strategy also sees this as an outcome as well for the future. So yeah, the more of these safe walking and cycling connections we can have across Kingborough is only positive. But yeah, thanks to all involved in making this happen.
Thanks, Councillor Midgley, Councillor Gladwright, and then Councillor Bain.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo quite a bit of what has already been said. I've been down to this area and have been walked around with the community and had a look at their issues and their desires for this pathway. There was that beautiful little video that they created with the school kids on their bikes saying, please, we just want a safe route to school. It was such a beautiful little piece of advocacy, and I really note the mature way that the group have been advocating. And so I thank them for their passionate advocacy. It is really frustrating for us, I think, because I suspect most of us really want this to proceed. I know we talk about this at the Safety Committee quite a bit as well, but it just seems to be stuck and we just don't seem to be making any progress. Just on that, I was wondering if we could have a little update or any kind of insight. Like, do we have a contact that we're dealing with directly, or what? Where's it at?
Mr. Reeve. He's going to tell you it's imminent.
Yes. Through you, Mayor, I wish I could. I might use another one that I use sometimes, that Rome's not built in a day. But I think the issue with it is that it's not sitting with council at the moment. It's actually sitting with the potential owner for the lot to actually prove their ownership to Crown. So at the moment, what we've got is effectively a bit of no man's land, which sort of precludes us from doing much at all. In some other cases there, where you have land that you can actually acquire off property owners, this one sort of precludes us doing anything at all until the property owner can actually go through that process. Now, we've had regular discussions with the property owner and her siblings, which are the potential owners of the land, and we heard back from her, I think it was only about 3 or 4 weeks ago, to say, yes, she's still pursuing it. However, we're still having to wait until she gets to that point and gets that transfer of ownership. And at that stage there, then, we're in a different ball game. So it may still take a little while. It's not unusual for some of these things to actually take a while. So I'm not expecting anything concrete back for at least the next 2 or 3 months or so. But what we do is we regularly do reach out to her to make sure things are still moving along. So fingers crossed.
Councillor Gladright.
And I was wondering if that beautiful little video could be sent to her. I wonder if she'd be interested in seeing that.
Mr Reeve.
Mayor, well, she may well be. I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt to actually send out something like that. So by all means, if you send me a copy, I'm happy to forward it on to her.
Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mayor. I was actually going to ask the same question about progress to date. But also just to echo the other councillors' contributions, this community group has been fantastic ever since I've been on council. I've been having catch-ups with them, and their advocacy is second to none. And I think, like us, they're also getting frustrated because they want to apply for grants and get things moving and help out as much as they can, but it's at a bit of a standstill. So I guess if we can communicate that to the owners of the land and let them know there's a lot of people who would like to see this progress, that would be fantastic.
Councillor Dean.
Sorry, there was one question that I wanted to forward on behalf of community members, was just around a lack of understanding. I was obviously terribly explaining it as to why we can't just compulsorily acquire the land.
You can't compulsorily acquire land for the purpose of active transport links. You can for roads, but not, and which to my mind doesn't actually, it means that the thinking in state government hasn't evolved as to the importance of active transport. You know, so if you want to build a road, yeah, you can take someone's property, but you can't for this purpose.
This is not me, this is again me not knowing, but my understanding was that it was around, the terminology was around critical infrastructure, and this is just not therefore deemed as critical infrastructure that can be used as compulsory, or are you saying?
Mr Reeve.
Through you, Mayor, it's not so much that, it's just where the powers might actually sit. So, for example, we have the Channel Highway that runs through there, and my understanding is State Growth also needs to acquire some land for their highway through there. So they all go through that process, and they've got the ability as the road owner to do that. But it's a bit of a call to actually say, well, you're going to acquire all the way up to the seaside, basically, which is not likely to happen. Whereas our power is a little bit limited, but it's even more limited with the fact that we don't even have an owner to actually have the discussion with at this stage. We know what the potential owner is, but until they are the owner, we have some difficulties associated with that. So yeah, it's a little bit frustrating. There's only very limited ways to actually deal with this outside of that. Ones that we could consider if this continued on for a period of time, such as abandoned land, which is a process by itself. But that's probably not our preferred approach. I think our preferred approach would be continuing the good faith discussions we've had with the potential owner, with the viewpoint at that stage there of coming to some sort of agreement in terms of either leasing or buying a section of land.
Councillor Dean.
So just on that other option, because I can't recall reading it in there, would there be a fair estimate that we could provide a time frame for in terms of pursuing what you have done, in terms of what you've outlined, and if within that time frame it just doesn't come forward in terms of the landowner, that we then decide, okay, Plan B at this point cuts in and we do, as you've just highlighted, look at abandoned
Mr Reeve.
Mayor, look, I think we'd be looking at something like about the next 6 months or so before we actually maybe have something where we report back to council and say, look, this is where we're actually at, and this may be another potential option, possibly. So I think we can give it a little bit of time. Unfortunately, I guess dealing with other organisations such as Crown Land and so forth, there can take a little while. So you know, there is an endeavour on part of the potential property owners, but they'll have to go through that bureaucracy as well at the same time.
Councillor Dean.
Would there be a significant cost to us if we were to pursue both avenues at the same time, in terms of what you've outlined in terms of taking ownership of possession of abandoned land, whilst concurrently pursuing with what we're trying to do with the landowner.
Mr. Reeve.
Through you, Mayor. Look, I guess the reason why we've stuck with the approach we've got at the moment there is we are trying to negotiate in good faith with the potential property owner. I guess going down the other path as well is not really acting in good faith as much and probably would get the potential owners offside. Bearing in mind, at the end of it, if they are granted ownership of the land, we still have to negotiate with them. You'd want to negotiate from a point of, you know, where we're on good terms as compared to, oh, by the way, you know, in the background there, you were just trying to take this land by stealth, so to speak, which is not what we intend at all. What we're actually intending to do is actually try and get a project up that's taking a little bit longer than we'd like. But, you know, from their perspective there, I think it's important that we sort of stay the course and maybe provide some information back to council 6 months maybe time just to see whether anything's actually changed.
Yeah, terrific. I'd very be in favour of an update, in whether it's 3 or 6 months, just to be kept in the loop, because I'm sure the community would also like to know. Thank you.
Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a follow-up question. Does the work that State Growth intend on doing and the work that we like to do have to be done at the same time, and is State Growth having the same frustrations in trying to acquire some of the land as well?
Mr. Reeve.
Through you, Mayor. Look, I'm not sure where they sit with their acquisition. Obviously, they've got some different powers to us because it's their road and they can acquire some land. So I'm not sure where they're actually at. I know they're exploring that themselves. So I don't think they're necessarily working hand in hand. We have mentioned to them, you know, our intention for our project there and how it would be useful if both of those could actually be looked at together, but I think they're very much focused on what they need for their highway as compared to anything else, and so that'll follow its own process. Whether or not, I'm not that familiar in terms of their acquisition rights there, whether they have the ability to deal with a bit of no man's land, not sure.
Any further contributions? Councillor Fox, did you want to close debate?
Only to say that considering that it was very difficult to get a mover, that I'm surprised how many people have had so much to say about this issue, and I'm certainly very interested. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to put the recommendation as printed on the screen because that's the amended one. It was moved by Councillor Fox, seconded by Councillor Cordova. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried unanimously. Now we're on page 175, nominations for the Kingborough Disability Inclusion and Access Advisory Committee with a recommendation on page 176. Looking for a mover and a seconder, please. Got a mover in Councillor Fox and a seconder in Councillor Cordova. Councillor Fox.
It's pleasing to see so many people are prepared to stay on, and I think that it looks like a good round lineup, and I recommend the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. I echo that sentiment, and also just to extend on that idea that I am truly grateful for all of the people who put their hand up in this community to volunteer their time to make Kingborough a better place to live, a more inclusive place, a more accessible place. The work is, I'm truly grateful for all the work that goes into it, and you can actually see the tangible benefits and the outcomes, the dividends that we're all receiving as community members from having a more inclusive and accessible community. So more power to the committee. Thank you to the committee members for the work that they do, and I wish you all a very successful year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Further contributions? I'll just add one briefly, and that is that I was delighted to see that all members are returning and that we also received 3 additional nominations. I remember going back about 4 or 5 years ago, we struggled to get enough people to actually put their hands up to be on this committee. So this is a great turnaround, and I think that particularly for those members who have been on there for a long time, they can look back and see what we've achieved in the last few years in terms of the advice that's given to council about different access issues around the municipality, both from our own infrastructure point of view, but also then for other areas and advice that we give to businesses. So it's a very, very engaged group, and I'm very grateful for all of those nominees that are continuing on and for the contributions that they do make throughout the year. So gives me pleasure to endorse all of those as well. Councillor Fox, did you want to say anything else?
No, thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the recommendation. It's as printed on page 176, moved by Councillor Fox, seconded by Councillor Cordover. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried. I think we might have a short break because we've got a fair few large items still to go, including the budget mid-year review. So for those watching at home, we're just going to have a 6.5 minute break. I don't know, I just pulled it out of my head. Okay, we'll go 10 minutes. You've all earned it. I know it's only the start of the year. 10-minute break, so we'll be back here at 7:25, so we'll just pause the recording for now. Thank you. General Manager. Hang on. Oh, you're behind me. Okay, welcome back. Apologies for our brief comfort stop. We are now on page 188, Annual Budget Mid-Year Review, with a recommendation on page 195. I'm looking for a mover and a seconder, please. A mover and a seconder. Moved Councillor Bain, seconded Councillor Midgley. Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mayor. So 16.7, we have the Annual Budget Mid-Year Review. The purpose of this report is to review the budget forecast after 6 months of actual expenditure and consider the progress in delivering the Capital Works program and to seek adjustments to individual budget items. So the forecast underlying operational result is a deficit of 1.56 million against the budget figure of a 12k surplus. The main reason for this large deficit relates to increased depreciation, which I understand will be worked through as part of the long-term financial plan, which is currently under review. The other side of things is the capital expenditure. So at the halfway mark of the year, it's predicted there will be a deficit of approximately 380,000 if all the projects were committed to. So the capital budget is currently over budget due primarily to some increased tender prices and need to vary scope for some projects. So the recommendation is the deferral of the construction of Pelverada Road this financial year to manage the overspend and also to allow some additional necessary projects to proceed. So I guess the obvious question is there any particular reason why Pelverada Road has been picked and what's the implications for that not going ahead this financial year?
Mr. Reeve.
Through you, Mayor. Not a lot of implications. What we'll continue to do is finalise the design, the investigations, and there's some minor acquisitions as well. So we've left some seed money in the budget there to allow for that. Pelverada Road, as you're well aware, is a very long road. I guess when I first came here, it was touted as the worst road in Kingborough. So over a number of years, we've been putting allocations into Pelverada Road to complete all the poor sections. This is the last. So the fact it gets deferred for 6 months or so, it's probably neither here nor now.
Councillor Bain.
No, on that basis, I'm happy to endorse the report and look forward to other contributions.
Councillor Street.
Thank you, Mayor. There is obviously something that sticks out in this report that really does need some explanation and a bit of a please explain. Can't let the pitch sail by on it, unfortunately. General Manager, do you have any comment on how we've ended up $1.5 million behind budget or thereabouts in relation to the operational deficit, and how it's the case that we have managed to end up with depreciation so far outside of budget estimates?
General Manager.
Through you, Mayor, the depreciation has been a concern for us over the last few years, quite frankly. It appears from recent work that every time we look closely into a particular asset class, as we regularly do, that the depreciation aspect comes back to bite us. We're currently in a situation where we're getting the impact in a few areas. One of those being the recent construction activity that we've been involved in as a council, particularly in the CBD of Kingston. As you build new infrastructure, it comes online and has to be accounted for, and that means that we do take a hit in our underlying position, and that's been reflected in the mid-year review, the report that's before you. In terms of, I think the implication of your question, Councillor Street, perhaps with hindsight, the forecast for the budget, the financial year that we're currently in. Perhaps the assumptions that we used in that budget preparation could have been higher than they are. That said, depreciation is just one of the major aspects that has hit us. As the report outlines, there are other areas that have also come into play. The building index at the moment is still substantially higher than it has been historically, but the depreciation component is the major impact that we're bringing in this report, unfortunately.
Councillor Street.
Yeah, look, I thank the General Manager for the candid answer on that. I suppose the concern is that it does... I understand that revaluations are hard to predict, certainly. There is an element of that, though, which is operator error, though, and that has to be the case, because we knew that this infrastructure was coming online, and we haven't estimated appropriately. So I'd hope that there's some reflection on that without casting blame around, that really that's unacceptable and we're going to need to do a better job. It's $1.5 million is a big variance.
Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick question about under capital expenditure 4.5.2, the CBD wetlands high flow bypass. So looking at the variance there, can I just have a bit more information about what the works that were undertaken? Please just explain a bit more detail about what happened.
Mr. Reeve.
Through you, Mayor. So they did put some drainage in, and that was sort of in the winter months. So the intention always was that there needed to be some extension of that drainage to actually make it work properly. And so there was a couple of things that it was waiting for. One was the completion of the floating wetlands, and the other one was for the drier months. So this is just that additional, I guess, extension of that swale to actually make sure that it actually works the way it's actually supposed to work. So pretty much what it is.
Councillor Cordova.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor, what's the expected lifetime of the improvements?
Mr. Reeve.
Through me, if you're referring to the swale, so like a swale like that will probably sit there for 40 or 50 years. We'll do some regular maintenance on it as we go through to make sure that it's remains vegetated. Sometimes you need to replace some of the vegetation. Sometimes you need to make some adjustments to the banks, but it'll probably sit there for a fair while before we need to do anything major on it.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor, it was just, I guess I was thinking in terms of, I'm often thinking about both population growth and impacts of more frequent and severe weather events, and I assume that's actually kind of factored into some of the infrastructure projects that we make, as they've got. Remember, sometimes I complain a little bit, maybe I just don't understand it, about how in terms of the AEP that we prepare it to withstand, a once in 20-year event or a once in 50-year event, and I kind of keep saying, well, these events are becoming more frequent and more severe, so maybe we need to increase that buffer. Please may I just have that talked to?
Mr. Reeve.
Through you, Mayor, yes, so we certainly take into account the fact that we've got a changing environment. So climate change effects actually all figure in any of our flood analysis. So where we might be, I guess, doing any stormwater works, it's usually been identified due to the fact there's a problem or a potential problem in the future. But if we're going to future-proof it, it would be remiss of us to actually then future-proof it to today, when we know full well that in 50 years or so, some of the impacts are going to be higher. So the various standards we look at also take into account the fact that there's some changes. So rainfall intensities and so forth are changing as well at the same time. So yes, all those things are taken into account.
Thank you, that's all.
Next I had Councillor Antoli and then Councillor Fox.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to springboard a little bit off what Councillor Street mentioned before, so he took a little bit of wind out of my sail, but that's all right. There was There is a comment made later on in our report where where our auditors, WLF, under Miss Alicia Lease, mentioned that we need to change the way that we treat strategic asset management and its relationship with the long-term financial plan. I'd like to ask the General Manager whether or not my understanding is that this is the key reason why we have had this blowout.
General Manager.
Through you, Mayor, I'm not sure it's the key reason we've had the blowout. I think there are a number of contributing factors. The report mentions the impact from the revaluation of stormwater assets, but it also takes into account the other revaluation work that's currently in progress, and it also is reflective of the fact that we currently have outstanding works in progress that haven't been brought into the financial as such. In other words, capital infrastructure that's been expended, the works are in the process of being signed off, and we have to estimate the impact that that's likely to have as well. So it's a combination of a major revaluation of the stormwater assets, asset class, two other revaluations that are currently underway, and an estimation of the impact of all of those. The comment from our auditors is a salient one. There is always room for improvement in how we manage our assets. It's been a work in progress for this council for some time. Clearly we haven't got it right as yet, but we are working on it.
Yes, thank you. If I may.
Yeah,
WLF are good auditors, very practical ones. They're my organisation's auditor, and I know Alicia Lease personally. She's a bit of a firecracker of an individual. So can I ask, we're about to throw ourselves in a new round of budget estimates and budget forecasting. We have actually got new management in the leadership of the finance team that we didn't have last time round. I must admit I'm hearing some pretty positive rumblings from staff about how the rigour that's been put into this year's round of budget formulation. So can I ask for a comment on how much of Miss Lee's recommendation has gone into or is going into the way we're forecasting forward?
General Manager? No, Mr. No.
Yep, through you, Mayor, if I could throw to my colleague, Mr. Spinks.
Through you, Mayor. Look, I think the recommendations that WLF were making are more longer term. One of the primary recommendations they were making is that our asset planning should drive the financial plan, whereas at the moment we're doing it in reverse. So that's not a change that can be made overnight, but I think we're very keen internally to do that and working very closely with my colleague here. So I think the challenge for next year's budget is to try and get that depreciation figure as right as we possibly can. But in the longer term, we need to be making some more deep-seated adjustments to how we just generally approach our strategy around this, I think.
Right, thank you. Great.
Councillor
I have one final question, which may be for you, Mayor. I'll let you decide. So we're going through some generational change at the top leadership of the organisation. We have a new CEO starting sometime in April that has been publicly announced. What involvement will he be having, even if it's remote and via Zoom or whatever, in the decision-making process, given that he has to own what we give him?
We wouldn't have, so the new CEO starts on the 15th of April, so we wouldn't have bedded down our budget before then. The budget is going to be coming to the first meeting in June, I believe, yep, first meeting in June. So, you know, whilst we're starting the process very shortly with a budget workshop, it won't be completely finished by the time
So he'll have
Mr.
plenty of
Stewart
time.
starts.
Yep, great. Good feedback. Thank you very much. And I do want to pass on the positive feedback I've heard from people that I think have very good external corporate experience, that the rigor this year seems to be very top-notch. So congratulations to Director People and Finance. It's nice to hear some praise from someone else.
Thank you. Councillor Fox.
Thank you, Mayor. I, like Councillor Antoli, read the internal audit report, and I was taken by surprise in a line on page 300, which I find quite concerning, and I'll quote, "It was noted Council is funding new asset spend from funds that should be set aside for the future replacement of existing infrastructure, and this would have future consequences in terms of funding the replacement program." I'm just wondering whether, in fact, they are significant amounts, and which areas these monies were spent according to this report.
Mr. Reeve. Mr. Spinks.
You can if you like, yeah.
Oh,
I can go first and my colleague can actually add if he wishes to. Yeah, so it has been an issue in terms of, I guess, the pressure in doing new works, and it's one that I've mentioned in more than one workshop, the fact that the various bids that come in, and they come in from all different angles, so whether they come from the community or whether they come from supporting grants or whether they come from supporting other projects, they do come from a lot of different angles, but the bottom line is that if you look at it, then there's more money being spent on the new and upgrade works than we would ideally desire based on just our depreciation modelling. We'd rather actually be spending more money on our replacement renewal. We know the fact that part of the reason behind that is our networks are in reasonable nick. Most of our condition assessments we've actually done have suggested that, particularly the roads. And what that means is we know that there's no issue now, but 10, 15 years down the track, there's a potential issue. And that's one of the reasons why in the last couple of years, as you would probably recall, we've been putting $1 million away in a reserve there to allow for some of the future issues that are likely to come up. However, one of the problems we do have is that we don't want to be in the situation where we're creating a bigger problem by the fact that we're actually pumping money into new and upgrade projects. Some are quite difficult in terms of actually trying to deal with. For example, if I looked at our stormwater projects, a lot of them are upgrade projects. Very few are replacement renewal, and they're coming from actual immediate issues in the fact that people are having flooding problems and so forth, and inevitably what that means is that the pipe itself will need to be upgraded to a larger size. So it's part new, part replacement, and a little bit unavoidable. If we do any road works, even though they might end up being replacement works, so for example, Auburn Road's a great example of one. It's going to be a fairly expensive project in the future because it's a long road, but it's also a very narrow road, so part of it will be to actually widen the road. So the widening part and all the work we need to do on the accesses end up being new works, and the other part of it ends up being replacement works. So you can see how easy it is for you to start spending a lot of money on new works. It's not necessarily always I'm building a new playground or I'm building a new building or whatever it happens to be. Quite often some of these things are ancillary to that, and it's about actually getting an appropriate and a best project that you end up actually pumping a little bit more money into new works rather than not. But it's probably exacerbated by the fact that our networks are in reasonable nick, which means from that, the demands on replacement renewal tend to be a little bit less, and therefore there's more capability to actually potentially spend in that. Plus also the fact that we're also a growing municipality, and a lot of people have these needs in terms of where the community, where they'd like to see the community actually go. So there's a lot of pressures in those areas as well. So a lot of the stuff that has been referred to in terms of the internal audit is about how we actually put all that information together to get a much better complete picture that then actually drives the long-term financial plan, rather than having a long-term financial plan there that it's largely predicated on depreciation, but rather have a more complete plan that actually says, let's have a plan that looks at all of our strategies, looks at all the potential new works actually coming up and the upgrade works coming up that you can't avoid, and also looks at the replacement renewal works as well at the same time. So that's quite a bit of work to do, as you appreciate, but it is by far a more complete model, and if you take into account that depreciation is a large measure and ends up actually driving a lot of our overall budget, even though it appears to be just a book figure, but it's not. It's actually important that we actually put the rigour into that. Certainly from our perspective, just picking up on a couple of the other points, if you don't mind, in terms of the depreciation in particular, part of it to do with stormwater was more to do with the timing issue from last year. So that was something where the budget was already set, and this has come up in all the financial reports that have come to council. So, a large part of that was an issue that's actually continued on from last year into this year. And some of the other work in terms of the outstanding works in progress, there's obviously a lot of new work that's actually coming on board with Kingston Park, which is some large-scale assets in that area, and also Main Road as well at the same time. But we've also put on some additional resource to actually try and deal with some of the outstanding work in progress. Double-edged sword, so you'll end up putting that onto the system there, but you increase your depreciation expense accordingly. So what we will be attempting to do this year is, well, not attempting to do, that's what we're doing this year. There's a couple of revals we're doing. We've brought them forward so they can be forecast within the budget for next year, and we're trying to get our forecasting better in terms of the fact that we can actually try and pick up some of these things as well at the same time.
Councillor Cordova.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick question about rate capping, and I'm referencing here page 300 and discussion from a different meeting, but I think it's relevant to the mid-year financial update. Discussion also queried assistance and guidance from other levels of government and noted the challenges presented in other states from rate capping. I'm interested in hearing what are those challenges in other states from rate capping, and if there is or would be any recommendation as regularly comes to me from the community, tell us about rate capping. Are you going to do rate capping? We want you to do rate capping. And I have my arguments, but I'm really interested to hear if council has an official position on it, and just to hear what are those other states' challenges that are being faced regarding rate capping with respect to our asset management maturity level.
Who's the lucky person? General Manager.
Through you, Mayor. I'll kick off Councillor Cordova by saying that, by way of comparison, New South Wales and Victoria have had rate capping in place for many years. In Victoria, the government have just, through the Minister, have just set the rate cap for the next financial year, the budget that we're all about to go into, and they've set that at 2.75%. So the 79 councils in Victoria know that one of two things happen. They meet that rate cap, or they go cap in hand to the Minister with a case to exceed the rate cap. The obvious implications of that are that even with the CPI rate dropping from the high of 12 months ago, it has not got back into the realm of 2.75% as yet. So that's the starting point in terms of challenges.
Thank you. So through you, Mayor, a follow-up question is then, is it fair to say that the recommendation would be here from this council, were we to have a proposal, that it would be unwise or imprudent, or insert word here for not a good idea, to adopt a similar system to what Victoria has for Kingborough Council with respect to rate capping?
Yes.
Thanks.
Councillor Antoli.
Thank you, Mayor. So riffing off what Councillor Cordova said, we don't have that body in Tasmania, do we, that rate caps like they do in New South Wales, IPART or whatever. So we set our own rules based on our own budget, whether that's good, bad or indifferent. I think right now it's pretty good because there seems to be quite a good balance in Kingborough between what our council needs and what the community's capacity to afford seems to be balanced through the checks and balances process of having independent councillors here. All right, so this is obviously, you know, you can read the room. It's a bit of a concern for us. I must admit, it did send a shiver through my spines when I read through this. So it's something that we have to deal with. We'll have to get better at forecasting and realign this relationship that we have with the strategic asset and the long-term financial plan, where the plan needs to be driven by the asset, the strategic asset management. And so I'm keen to see a lot more of that science this year than maybe we have experienced in years past. This is not a criticism at anyone. I think there's a lot of discussion, horse trading that happens during our budget discussions. I want this road fixed, I want that road fixed, and it doesn't seem to be driven that much by the numbers. And I think sometimes it can throw the plan off, make it quite difficult, but that's budget deliberations for you. Most boards, of which we are, don't seem to get their finger involved much in the budgets. They sort of approve them and just ask questions, but they don't seem to drive them as much. It seems to happen at the council level. Is that your experience around Tasmania, or do we do it differently compared to other councils?
Mr. Spinks.
Through you, Mayor. Look, I would agree with the observation the council has just made in terms of how boards might typically look at this. Are we doing it any differently than other councils? No, I don't believe so. I think most councils you would find are probably more in that detailed space. My opinion would be probably too much so. I think the emphasis needs to be a little bit more on these higher level issues that we're just starting to sort of tease out just now, and we'll talk much more about at the workshop next week. But no, I don't think we're doing it terribly different than anywhere else.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Cordova, another question?
Sorry, thanks, Mayor. And just to take us back a step, I guess, I just wanted to highlight the Civic Centre and the reallocation of funds away from, the change to include the security improvements and changes to customer service area and review of the long-term accommodation options. What is the current state of the Civic Centre, and what should we expect in terms of the kind of investment that we will need over the next 6 months? I'm trying to ascertain whether the reallocation seems to me fairly straightforward and kind of makes sense, but I'm just interested to hear some more justification for it, if possible.
Were you not at the workshop that we had that discussed accommodation for the Civic Centre?
I was, and okay. My feeling is that I'd like it justified that we're not throwing good money after bad, in a sense that, my house is fairly ramshackle, and so as a result, maybe I won't improve all the bits and pieces of my house because it's already passing its use by date. So how much more money do you spend?
So the decision was made to go ahead with the air conditioning because, as you can feel right now, it's very uncomfortable in this building on a warm day, particularly for staff who are, we're only here for a few hours. Staff are here all around. We're lucky that has come in at a lower price that will enable us to do the necessary security upgrades, and as previously discussed, that has been a recommendation by Kingston Police that we take that action to protect staff and also councillors and other visitors to the Civic Centre. I'm not sure, can you talk us through the changes to the customer service area? I'm not familiar with those. Mr.
Yes,
Reid.
through you, Mayor. Yeah, so effectively this is a work health and safety issue. So it's to do with how the customer service benching is actually set up there, and it's to do with your chairs versus your higher counter. So it's been a long identified issue that we were aware of, but it's been a constant issue, and I suppose we're taking this opportunity to try and deal with that at the same time during this part of it. And the last one, which is really to do with the bigger picture sort of stuff in terms of, you know, options for accommodation going forward, which would have been part of the workshop, which, you know, you would have been aware of.
Thank you. So through you, Mayor, just to summarise, as a question, it's fair to say, isn't it, that the Civic Centre security improvements and the changes to the customer service area are actually quite interlinked. So thank you for that.
Further discussion? No. I will put the... Oh, Councillor Bain, did you want to sum up?
Just to thank everyone for their contributions, and just for the record, with the air conditioning replacement, am I correct in saying that there is no air conditioning at the moment? This isn't a replacement, this is...
Oh, this is kind of... this is what it kind of does, which is very little. Yeah.
So it's very, very reasonable.
Yep.
Oh, thank you.
Just for the record, next time you sum up, you're not allowed to ask a question. But I'll let it slide. Okay, so we're putting the recommendation, moved by Councillor Bain, seconded by Councillor Midgley. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Motion is carried unanimously. Financial report for December 2023 with a recommendation on page 192. Looking for a mover and a seconder, please. Moved Councillor Bain. Seconded Councillor Cordova. Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mayor. A lot of this has already been covered in the previous agenda item. I guess one of the questions I just had is some of the finer details around the forecast result has moved from, I think it was about 978,000 to 1.5. So is there any specific items which have been found in the last month or so for that $600,000 increase?
Mr. Spinks.
Yes, through you, Mayor. So the major item that's moved in the last month is the depreciation thing we've just been speaking about, and specifically it's that issue that the General Manager referred to of we've made an estimate for the depreciation effects of the assets we're starting to put onto the books properly. So these are the assets that have been constructed in recent times. Now they need to go onto the books and start getting depreciated. So we've made an estimate for that, and that's pretty much the difference.
Councillor Bain.
Thanks, and just a quick follow-up question. The final comment in 5.2 mentions that inflationary pressures mean there will likely be another significant increase at June 2024 affecting the 24-25 depreciation expense. Is that inflation in general, or is there some more items which are currently being revalued which is going to impact next year's budget?
Mr. Spinks.
Yes, thank you. Look, that comment could probably be better worded now. So as Mr. Reid mentioned, we're also revaluing some asset classes this year. Those two asset classes are the open space class and buildings, and we've got some preliminary results on both of those, and they've been included into the forecast as well. So I think that comment could probably come out to a certain degree next month. So that new estimate there of 1.57 for the depreciation increase, that includes that.
Great, thank you.
Further discussion? No. Councillor Gladright.
I have a question. I'm just reading on page 194. It talks about, it's like the last dot point, talks about profit of sale of assets, and then the very last line says the remaining difference reflects the higher sale prices received in the healthy used vehicle market. I was just wondering how that relates to Kingston Park.
Mr. Spinks.
Yes, Kingston Park, so you'll be aware that we receive a percentage payment from the sales of the units and townhouses over there. So that payment we're taking up into that line item. So it probably could go into perhaps a line item which is a little bit more obvious, shall we say, but that's where it's going to at the moment. And the other comment in relation to is just the turnover of our fleet, vehicle fleet. Some good profits that we're making there at the moment.
Okay, I guess I'll have to accept that.
Further discussion? Oh, sorry. Mr. Spinks?
I can explain some more. Yeah, so over the course of stage 1 of Kingston Park, we received an initial payment from them when we sold the land of a little over $2 million. With all the royalty payments that we've received since then, that figure is going to be more around $3 million. And so we just take up that income into that income line.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councillor Midgley.
Thank you, Mayor. Just noting, I think we're due to have a workshop on Kingston Park and the update in regards to that. When is that happening?
Sorry, the workshop?
Workshop around
that
Kingston
is likely
Park.
to be March. Yep. Further discussion? If not, Councillor Bain, would you like to sum up? All right, I'll put the recommendation. It's moved by Councillor Bain, seconded by Councillor Cordover. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried unanimously. Moving now to appendices. Looking for a mover and a seconder, please. I've got a mover, Councillor Midgley, and a seconder in Councillor Bain. Councillor Midgley, any questions? Anybody?
Sure, I've got a couple of questions about the GM's activities. In regards to the one on the 5th of December, the Local Government Climate Capability Program workshop. December was a very busy month and I attended a workshop for councillors and community members. Just checking, that was the one at the hub. Is that correct, where the Menzies attended and Katrina Graham? Just if I can... Yep.
General Manager.
Through you, Mayor. That's correct, Councillor Midgley. You might recall that the Local Government Association received a substantial financial contribution to undertake this program for councils across the state. Katrina Graham is one of the key officers involved in the implementation of that program and the grant.
Thank you. Yes, I attended and there was 2 other community representatives and I think it was for some of the southern councillors, so I'm not sure the word didn't get out too far. Perhaps, I don't know, maybe just a busy time of the month in December, but I guess there was some really interesting and new information that I learned, and especially from a health perspective as well, in regards to the impact of climate change and health and well-being. And I guess, in summary, like, did you take anything from that to move forward or actions to implement from that?
General Manager.
Through you, Mayor, it's probably still early days in the program rollout. Suffice to say that we will be reporting back to Council on it as the program proceeds.
Thank you. And the other one on the Taswater service charge, a meeting regarding that on the 22nd of January, please.
General Manager.
Through you, Mayor, I met with an owner of a property in Howden who has a notation on the title when the land was subdivided back in the 90s. That council at the time was still responsible for water and sewerage, but there was a notation that council could not provide potable water. That has since changed, and Taswater have advertised the change following their audit process to one particular landowner, not the adjoining properties. And he has received a service charge. It is probable that his adjoining landowners will receive the same service charge from Taswater in due course.
Thank you.
Councillor Antoli, and then Cordover, and then Fox.
Thank you, Mayor. I have 2 questions. They are around the audit panel report. On our agenda, it's page 300. The first question is a line underneath the strategic asset management report. It's the we talked about it before when, you know, about Miss Lisa's comments. It's this last sentence that says the management audit effectiveness survey results were noted as high. What does that mean?
Mr. Speaks.
Thank you, Mayor. So this is a feedback mechanism for WLF. So at the completion of every review area they do, we do a small survey of the officers involved in that review to see how it went, how well it was communicated, were they happy with the findings and the results and the process, just to feed back to Wise, Lord and Ferguson how we felt their review went.
Great. Okay, so it's not about the management of the audit panel or our internally, it was about them. Fantastic. My second question, I'm not too sure who it's directed to, but if I have a question that I'd like to ask the chair of the audit panel, do I funnel that question through someone in particular, or can I go direct to the chair?
General Manager, we're all looking at you.
Yep. Through you, Mayor. There are a few ways you can do that. Councillor Antoli, you could certainly funnel the question direct to the independent chair of the audit panel. Similarly, you could ask either of your councillor colleagues that currently sit on the audit panel to take that question up on your behalf.
Great.
Or finally, like all councillors, even though you're not the council appointed rep on the audit panel, there's an open invitation for any councillor to attend audit panel meetings.
Thank you. Great, thanks for clarifying the protocol.
Councillor Cordova.
Thanks, Mayor. Two quick questions about General Manager's diary. One is to do with the meeting, where they're both to do with the meetings to discuss development matters, one on the 29th of November and the other on the 11th of January. Is there any information that can be divulged about what development matters we're talking about?
The General Manager.
Through you, Mayor. The meeting on the 29th of November was with a representative of the Kingston Beach Golf Club. The development matter pertained to the fact that the golf club are applying or have applied for a development approval for a driving range north of the existing clubhouse, fronting Channel Highway, and the discussion was around access to fill that's required as part of that development application. That was for the 29th of November, and your other date, Councillor Cordova, was?
The 11th of January.
The 11th of January. That was a discussion that was, I attended in company with my fellow director, and we were in discussion with a couple who had reached, well, on the face of it, an impasse in discussions on their development application. My colleague appears to have resolved that matter to their satisfaction very quickly, and would be happy to provide you further advice outside the council meeting.
Councillor Cordova.
Thank you for those answers. That's very helpful. I did have a question around with discussions with the golf club. Will that come before a council meeting at some stage? The DA.
General Manager.
Through you, Mayor, my expectation is that it would. I say that on the basis that whilst the planners have delegation, I suspect that the application such that it is will probably attract some submissions, would be my best guess. The concept being proposed is one that many, perhaps all of you, are familiar with. Golf driving range, cafe/restaurant, and they're pretty prevalent on the mainland.
Thank you, that's all.
Councillor Fox. Oh, you just switched your light off then. There we go.
Sorry, I just have a quick question on page 282. the picture of Blowhole Road reconstruction, and I'm wondering whether there will be underground power provided in that reconstruction, because I see that as something really important in this community as a fire safety issue.
Mr. Reeve.
Through you, Mayor, no. So it'd be pretty cost prohibitive to actually put underground power. We certainly had that query put to us, but it's not one that we would normally do. Certainly for all our new development, we require them to put underground power, but we have to look at our own particular ones on a case-by-case basis, and trying to do that would make the project probably a bit cost prohibitive.
Thank you for the answer. I guess I'm aware that it's one of the oldest roads in Blackmans Bay. It's been a long time, and it's probably one of the last cabs off the rank. And it's disappointing to see that we're not doing this one really well. It's also a tourist route going to the Blowhole Reserve, as well as a one-way street into the beach and from that area. And I think it's an important link to Blackmans Bay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Midgley, did you want to close debate? No, I'll put the recommendation. It's moved by Councillor Midgley, seconded by Councillor Bain. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried unanimously. We're on page 273. There were no notices of motion received, and that takes us to items to be dealt with in closed session. Confirmation of minutes and applications for leave of absence. I'm looking for a mover and a seconder, please. Got a mover in Councillor Fox and a seconder in Councillor Midgley. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried. So in accordance with the Kingborough Council Meetings Audio Recording Guidelines Policy, recording of the open session of the meeting will now cease. So thank you very much to those people who have been watching along at home on YouTube. We appreciate that. Good evening, and open session of Council adjourned at 8.